Okay, so we are on lesson 7 in the second booklet. So we're looking at modern medicine. The time frame that we're actually talking about is the 1900s to now. So for a lot of modern medicine, you can have a think about, well, in the latter half of these videos, as we come to the end of the booklet, you can think about your own experiences in a hospital, with medicine, with GPs, the NHS, and we will look into that. But before we do, we still need to think about so we're looking both at the 20th and 21st century, which is what we're calling the modern period, so 1900 to present. So for lesson 7, what we're actually doing is we are looking at, let me just get the slide up. What further progress has been made in the understanding of disease and illness in the 20th and 21st century? So, trying to think about what things have been developed or understood that has impacted medicine. And you'd see here that there's a lot more understanding about the body and medicine and how we can use medicine, how we can produce medicine. And that obviously impacts public health in the 20th and 21st century. Obviously, whenever you're thinking about medicine, I've mentioned this in a few videos, but we're living in a time where you can compare to what things are being done, like who's involved. You've got government, you've got science, you've got technology. Think about it, because this is the kind of idea, the development of this. And today we'll be looking at developments in science and how that has had an impact in our understanding of disease and illness. So to start us off, you've got a low stakes quiz to do that you should be able to answer from the industrial period. We then have this triangle over here, thinking about things that we did in the very first lesson, just kind of thinking back to that, what we're actually looking at. We're looking at the cause of disease, we're looking at the prevention of disease, and we're looking at treatments of disease. Now, when we think about the modern period, we think about, well, we look at genetic causes, we look at environmental causes, and obviously based on our understanding, because of the industrial period, we know that it's to do with bacteria and microorganisms. When we think of prevention of disease in this time, so similarly in the industrial period, when they're starting to get developed a little bit more, we're looking at vaccinations, and we'll also be looking at, in this modern period, the idea of limiting risk factors in terms of environmental factors. So that might be stuff like reducing smoking or obesity, and how the government promotes that, and how education promotes that to prevent diseases in the future, and our understanding of that link. And then we also look at treatment. So obviously, when it comes to treatment, we need to think about how are we diagnosed in the GP, what do we have available to us to treat us in terms of equipment, in terms of knowledge, in terms of communication, in terms of our, education about medicine. So it's always about thinking about those factors of medicine and how they fit into our understanding of these concepts. So if you just want to fill in what was in that box over here. This next bit, I am going to put up on the slide in a second, because I want you to kind of attempt it yourself first of all, and then have a look at what I'm about to show you. But what you have to do is think about what have been the main ideas about the causes of illness and disease over time. So you've got some statements, and you just have to create a key, so different colours. Obviously, it'll be a lot easier for you to do this with your actual physical booklets, not from the computer, which is why I won't be showing you. But you just have to literally create a key, different colours, and think. So if we had the first one, ancient belief that an imbalance in 4 main humours in the body resulted in illness. So if that belief was present, that would be somewhere towards the top. So you'd start off in the Middle Ages. People definitely believed that there was an imbalance. There's this one section here that's blank. So what is that section? What's the second time period that we learnt? it is the Renaissance period. And then you just think, well, did that continue? Yes, that did continue because bloodletting still continued. You could argue that, this is depleting. And then where does that graph go? So you may see that first key that you put in, that first colour, you may see end up really depleting. But by the time of 1900, no one really believes in the four humours. And that's what I want you to do for each one. So the belief that God sent disease such as plague as punishment, where is that? Show me in that graph. Planets, miasma, decaying matter, created microorganisms, and germ theory. Where does that start off? Where do those concepts finish? So if you take a few minutes to do that, and your graph should end up looking something like this. Obviously you would have put a key, but feel free to obviously just label it as well on the side. And what you would have seen here is that, just like I said, the four humours, we see it completely depleting, but at this point no one even believes it. You've got the idea of God sending punishment, disease as punishment, again depleting the Renaissance period as people started to develop new ideas. The ideas of planets deplete by the Renaissance. You've got miasma actually increases. So while people still believe in miasma, that in the Middle Ages, which is what we've learnt, people still believed in God as being the prime sort of reason with sending punishment, and that's because of the dominance of the Catholic Church. But this actually continues in the Renaissance quite heavily, and even in the beginning of the industrial period, Florence Nightingale herself believed in miasma, and then we see a depletion. This, hopefully you didn't get confused, that one was spontaneous generation, which only peaks in this time frame here. Sorry. And then our last one being germ theory, you could have extended that further along because it's still something that we believe today. Okay, so once you have done that, when you move on to the next page, now there's not a lot of space here, so you're going to have to write quite small, but the instructions are in your booklet. So first of all, what you have to do is identify the main lifestyle factor understood to contribute to illness and disease. So out of these pictures, what do you think they're talking about? Now, lifestyle factor is something that, it's just how your everyday life is. So over here, it's a picture of a cigarette, so we can assume we can do a title of smoking. That can affect health. Here's some beer, so we could write alcohol. This is fast food, so we could write obesity. I might actually just write this down. You've got someone running with a cross, which means lack of exercise. You've got a injection, so a form of drugs. And the last one is a brain, so we can assume that one is mental health. And those are your kind of lifestyle factors. So they're not things that are genetics. So when we think about, you might have learned this in science, when we think about disease and how our bodies are affected, in the modern period, we tend to think we're genetically inclined to a disease. So, our genetics may contribute to it, or it's a lifestyle factor. It's the way we live. It might be the stress that's put on us. That would be around mental health. It might be our lack of exercise that leads to problems like heart attacks linked with obesity. It might be smoking, which is proven to kind of impact the idea of lung cancer. Alcoholism affecting the liver. All those things are factors that could affect health, and that's something that people kind of control, and it's their lives that control it. Now, the second activity is suggest how each lifestyle factor affects health. So it's just a simple comment. So I might write here, lack of exercise can lead to obesity and lung/heart problems. Now, this second bullet point you might struggle with if you kind of have no kind of understanding of any of them, which is fine, but because if not, then I would like you to do the third one only. But please attempt to explain how it can affect you. So think about what you know already. How can each of these lifestyle factors affect health? And then the third one is using a fact from the slide I'm about to put up. Just put in a fact about each one. So the smoking one's already done for you. One recent estimate suggests that life expectancy is reduced by at least 7 years on average. And if we look on the slide, you can just pause the video and pick out a fact to put for each picture. So just if we were to go with R1, okay, here we go. We can say 14% of adults in the UK exercise regularly. Okay, so that's very, very small percentage. 14% out of 100% of people in the UK exercise regularly. And that's a statistic, a fact that we can put in our, where we've just written it down, lack of exercise. So pause the video and pick out your facts for that section of the lesson. Okay, once you finish that, we'll be moving on to this next section here. So like I said, when we think of modern medicine, we think of two things. We think of lifestyle factors and your environmental factors affecting your health, and we think of genetics. Now, genetics is a very big breakthrough in the modern period because it kind of explains why some people get diseases that are unexplained, and it's because their genes, they might have a gene in their body that is coded for a particular disease. So what you have to do is read through this information, and you just have to explain why are genes important. Now, you've probably done genes in science, and you don't need to know, all the details about what bases link to each other and whatnot. You just need to understand a brief summary of what it is, and more importantly, why is it so important to health and medicine. So what a gene actually is in the body, in every cell of the body, you have a nucleus. Now, the nucleus is what holds all information of that cell. Now, in that nucleus, you have something called a chromosome. This chromosome is essentially, if you were to look with the technology that is now available at this time, you'd be able to see that this is the DNA. It's called a double helix DNA. As you can see, there's 2 strands, and each gene, so let's say each line, is a set of instructions. Now, the body, we know that this is what makes up the body. So it might be a gene for eye colour. It might be a gene for hair colour. It might be a gene for a certain disease. Okay, so these are all genes that make up the body. Now, everyone's genes are different because obviously they're made up from different genes from your parents, and that's how you're linked to your parents. So what you have to do is read through the information here and then just tell me why is it important. Now, you need to think about, well, if each gene tells you information about the body, why does that link to disease? And you can find that here. And I want you to tell me, why are genes so important? It might seem obvious to you because we believe the idea that genes, dictates what sort of diseases we may have at some times. But you have to think in the beginning of the 19th, in the 20th, 21st century, so in the beginning of the 20th century, there wasn't this understanding. And it was only in the 20th century where people actually understood what genes were and how that links. So read through that to explain what is, why is it so important. So I'm just going to put on the image on the board here to give you a better understanding of what they are. So this is what a gene is. Those things here are bases. So you might have seen it in science, ATCG. You don't need to know that. You just need to know their bases. And this is a double helix, the actual spiral. And they're linked together. And that is what is essentially the instructions in your body. Now, what we are looking at is obviously, well, why is it so important, and how does it help? How does the understanding of genes affect us in history? Why is it so important, and how were they able to understand it? So what is in this area here on this page is different factors, the factors behind the development of genetics. Now what you have to do, so you've got information about each factor, and you need to tell me why is that so important in medicine and health. So you've got a role of individuals. So essentially what we have here, if we've got people who had an interest in biology and an interest in DNA, and they were able to find out to what the DNA actually was. You've got science, technology, and inventions. The fact that an electron microscope is able to allow you to see that DNA. Without that technology, it wouldn't have been able to happen. And the textbooks to be able to kind of, instead of using textbooks, we've got this idea of electronic equivalence that's going to allow us to hold all this information. And then you've got teamwork. Now, it's not just alone that people were able to look at the genes and figure out what it was. It's about looking at other people's work and having a really good understanding, a global understanding of genes, because it's not an easy job. So you just have to read through the information. That was kind of just a summary, but really the specific information that you need is in each one. So I want you to read through it, highlight any key information, and then explain to me why it's so important. So I'll do science and technology with you. So Crick and Watson had the latest and best equipment to help them. They use electron microscopes, which uses a beam of electron to illuminate the sample examined instead of regular light. An optical microscope magnifies a sample up to 2,000 times. An electron microscope can magnify a sample up to 10 million times. This technology allows scientists to examine DNA and how it is formed. X-ray photography allowed the scientists to capture detailed images of a single strand of DNA, which helped them realize it was shaped as a double helix. More recently, computers played a important part in storing and passing on information gathered. The information carried in human DNA would fill about 80,000 textbooks. The electronic equivalent of this information can be passed across the world instantly due to the internet. So, science and technology helped because the electron microscope allowed magnification up to 10 million, which allowed scientists to see and examine the double helix. This meant that they were able to see the unique structure of genes. They were also able to hold and transport this information via the internet, allowing efficient understanding of genetics. So something like that, just to explain how it helped. Essentially, whenever you're looking at a factor, you're this meant that, and you're as a result. So pretend that that's what you're looking at. Imagine these were factors in an explain why question. Why is teamwork? Explain why teamwork is important. just tell me why. This meant that as a result as your sentence starters. Once you have finished that, we are coming to the end of the lesson. And essentially what you have to do is read through the 3 impacts of genetics. So number 1 being, let me see if it's the other way here. Yep. Okay, number 1 being the diagnosis and identification of genetics and diseases. So why is it important, do you think, when we look at diagnosis and identification, would you say that had a minimal impact, a small impact? Was it a noticeable impact, or was it a significant impact? So read through that and think, is it a big deal? Is it significant that they're able to diagnose and identify genetic diseases? And I want you to put an X and take a piece of information as to why you put that there. So I might put down in my one that it is a significant impact. So I might just do, it's a graph, so I'm going to put an X here. And then I'm going to say, because my X and Y axes line up here, so significant impact, diagnosis and identification, I've put here. Then I'm going to say significant because, I'm just going to move it up so you can see. It allowed scientists to identify important common diseases such as Alzheimer's, breast cancer, diabetes, and cystic fibrosis. Once identified, they can try to treat diseases. So I'm saying it's very significant that they're able to identify it, because without that, they wouldn't be able to treat those particular diseases. And I've got that information from that box here. You have to do the same thing with the other 2. So the fact that people can now test and screen diseases. So people are able, so governments are able to create screening programs where people get screened for very common diseases for particular age groups. For example, women over the age of 25 typically invited every few years to check if they, may have cervical cancer. So that's a screening program done by the government. Why is that important? Do you think that would have a minimal impact, noticeable impact, or significant impact? Again, use that information. And then lastly, treatment and gene therapy. The fact that people are able to utilize their knowledge of genetics, and then they can treat it. So they can use stem cells. So you might have seen this in RE. Using stem cells is what essentially you're able to regrow stem cells to be used for particular things. Now, a lot of people, the kind of way is to use stem cells from embryos, which brings ethical issues. So do you think that is minimal, noticeable, or significant? But again, read the information and then you can make your own decision. There's no wrong answer here. Okay, and then the last activity is to just summarize the kind of steps of the development of genetics. So who found out what did they do with that information, what was the impact, and what are the limitations. And then in your summary box, you can write down just how important you think the developments of understanding and identifying genetics and genes is, and tell me why. So if you just want to do that, pause the video, do that, and then here are the answers. Okay. If you would like, you can fill in the summary over here, but do you also think about in your summary box, well, do you think it's important? And use the idea of simples to figure it out, whether you think it definitely is a big breakthrough, because obviously the understanding of genes is very different to everything that we've studied so far. Okay, thank you.